Since humanity first appeared on Earth, we have been haunted by one question: what will happen after we die? Few questions are at once so intimate and so mysterious. Countless civilizations, religions, and schools of thought have arisen just to answer it. Yet no matter how far science advances, death remains a closed door. No one has truly stepped through it and returned to tell us everything they saw. In the mid-20th century, however, medicine began recording strange cases. People were declared clinically dead, their hearts had stopped, their brains had ceased functioning, and then they came back. When they woke, they reported that their awareness had continued while their bodies lay motionless. Scientists call this phenomenon the near-death experience. One case that shocked many was that of Dr. Anita Moorjani, an Indian woman living in Hong Kong. She had late-stage cancer, her body failing, her organs shutting down. In the hospital, doctors said there was no hope. Yet in the very moment medicine would call death, Anita said she left her body, saw the entire hospital room, watched her loved ones weeping, heard the physicians conversing, and then passed through an incredibly radiant light. She described a feeling of weightlessness, free of fear and pain, as if enveloped by an energy of pure love. When she revived, she recounted in detail the words and actions of the medical staff while she had been dead, and those details were confirmed to be accurate. Another case is Dr. Eben Alexander, an American neurosurgeon. For most of his life, he believed consciousness was nothing more than a product of the brain. But when he himself fell into a 7-day coma due to meningitis, with his brain nearly inactive, he underwent a series of extraordinary experiences: light, sound, compassionate beings, and a sense of dissolving into boundless love. When he recovered, his old beliefs collapsed. He devoted the rest of his life to studying consciousness and concluded that what he saw was not an hallucination. It was a deep layer of mind that science has not yet understood. Such stories have been recorded across the world in many cultures. Despite differences in religion, language, and belief, they share striking similarities. Some people report leaving their bodies and watching themselves being resuscitated. Some say they traveled through a luminous tunnel toward a brilliant yet peaceful light. Some hear a gentle calling urging them to return. All describe the same core phenomenon: awareness persists even when the body has gone dark. This forces modern science to ask again whether consciousness can exist independently of the physical body. Is there a part of us that surpasses death? That is the central question of the journey we are about to begin. While science tests, measures, and debates, more than 25 centuries ago the Buddha entered this very domain through direct contemplation. Without machines or EEGs, he investigated the nature of life and death within his own mind. In deep meditation, he clearly observed the arising and passing of mental moments and the conditioned origination of feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. He declared, "Within this fathom-long body, together with perception and consciousness, the Tathagata directly knows the origin and cessation of suffering." The meaning is that the secret of life and death lies right here in our present body-mind, not in some distant realm. According to the Buddhist teaching, death is not an ending but a transition of the stream of consciousness. When the body breaks down, if karma has not been exhausted, that consciousness immediately takes support in new conditions and gives rise to another body. There is no soul that migrates from one body to another. There is only a causal stream of mind and matter flowing on, like a flame passed to a new torch. The new flame is not the old flame, yet it is not separate from it. Thus, for Buddhism, awareness is not confined by the body. This body is an instrument, like a lute that produces sound. When the lute is broken, music is not destroyed, it simply no longer sounds there. Sound belongs to vibration. Awareness belongs to mind. What is remarkable is that near-death experiences seem to be bringing science and Buddhism closer. More scientists now admit that consciousness cannot be reduced to electrochemical neuron activity. Something subtler continues to function when the physical organism pauses. The Buddha named that something quite simply vaya, the stream of knowing that arises dependently together with name and form. Buddhists do not take near-death accounts as proof of rebirth. They regard them as vivid lessons in impermanence. In the moments between life and death, people often discover that the most important thing is not status, fame, or wealth, but the quality of their mind as they depart this life. Many who have had near-death experiences say they saw their entire life review, every deed, word, and emotion flashing before them like a fast-moving film. They felt, with great sensitivity, the joys and the pains they had caused others. After returning, they lived differently, more gentle, more forgiving, less afraid. Placed alongside the Buddha's words, these reports are sobering. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says that the near-death mind leans in a direction, and one is reborn accordingly. In the path of purification, it is explained that before death the wicked see frightening signs, the virtuous see auspicious signs. This means that in the final moment, the whole weight of our karma and consciousness manifests as imagery, like a mirror reflecting ourselves back to us. Viewed closely, what science records as near-death experience is precisely the phase in which consciousness surges as the body decays and death-proximate karma begins to operate. Those with wholesome karma see light, loved ones, and compassion. Those burdened by unwholesome karma may meet darkness and fear. Though not truly dead, the mind has touched the boundary of karma. From this angle, NDEs are not curiosities, but windows into how the mind works when facing death. If we understand that in the end only our karmic mind follows us onward, how can we live heedlessly, with hatred and selfishness, in the present day? To understand death is not to pry into the other side, but to live more fully on this side. Then we will not wait until our last breath to realize that each word can save or wound a heart. Each thought can create heaven or hell, and each mindful breath steps through a portion of our fear of death. This introduction invites you into a journey between two worlds. One is the world of science, where people strive to verify the existence of consciousness. The other is the world of Dharma, where we turn inward to directly realize our own mind. We will move through layers. What does science say about this phenomenon? How does psychology explain it? What did the Buddha teach about mind, perception, and karma at the time of death? Most importantly, how can we apply this to a life of mindfulness today? One who contemplates death daily does not live negligently. Death does not come to them like a thief in the night. This verse gently reminds us that death is not an enemy. It is the quietest teacher, showing us how to cherish each breath. The one who understands death is the one who has begun to understand life. After hearing these strange stories of people who crossed death's threshold and returned, scientists began conducting systematic studies. Their aim was not to prove the soul, but to discover what truly happens between life and death in the brain and in awareness. Over decades, thousands of cases have been recorded in hospitals worldwide. Despite differing contexts, most people who have had near-death experiences describe remarkably similar patterns. Psychologists call this the typical structure of an NDE, a sequence of psychological and perceptual stages that appears to follow an unexpected order. People often describe 4 or 5 main features. First is the sensation of leaving the body. The person knows clearly that they still exist, but are no longer confined by the physical body. They say they float up to the ceiling and look down to see doctors and nurses resuscitating their own body. Some even recount details with such precision that the medical staff are astonished. For example, they accurately describe the color of clothing, medical instruments, and even objects hidden from ordinary lines of sight. Second is the tunnel and the light. People say they pass through a long, dark tunnel, at the end of which is a radiant, warm source of light that emanates an indescribable love. The light is not blinding like the sun. It receives them gently and makes them feel absolutely safe. Some say the light seems to understand them and communicates without words through pure empathy. Third is meeting those who have passed away or luminous beings. For Westerners, these may be God, angels, or deceased relatives. For people in the East, they may be the Buddha, bodhisattvas, or ancestors. Though the images differ, the common point is the feeling of being welcomed, forgiven, and loved. Fourth is the life review. In that moment, they see every small detail of their lives, joys and sorrows, what they did and the consequences for others. No one judges them, but they themselves feel completely the pain or the joy they once caused. They say, "I judge myself by the mirror of love." Finally, there is the choice to return or go on. Many report being asked by an idea rather than words, Do you want to stay here or go back? When they think of loved ones and children, they immediately feel pulled back into the body, then open their eyes, often at the very moment the heart is shocked for the last time. These phenomena surprised the medical community. In 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody, an American psychologist and philosopher, published Life After Life. He compiled more than 100 near-death cases and pointed out striking commonalities. From then on, the topic moved beyond religion and belief and entered the laboratories of medical institutes. After Moody, other notable figures continued researching. Bruce Grayson, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, created the Grayson Scale, a standardized questionnaire that scores the near-death experience. Sam Parnia, a critical care physician at New York University, led the AWARE project, tracking cardiac arrest patients across multiple hospitals with EEG monitoring and post-recovery interviews. The results baffled scientists. In many cases, patients reported rich experiences while the brain showed no electrical activity. Biologically speaking, they could not have been dreaming or imagining. So where did those images come from? Neuroscientists have proposed several hypotheses. One is cerebral hypoxia. When the heart stops, blood no longer reaches the brain. Neurons starved of oxygen fire chaotically, producing lights, tunnels, and sensations of floating. This explains the light to some extent, but it does not account for patients accurately describing the external setting while they were comatose with eyes closed. A second is REM sleep intrusion, in which the boundary between waking and dreaming collapses. The brain generates a lucid dream. People dream of dying and then awaken with a sense of reality. But this hypothesis also runs into trouble because near-death narratives differ from dreams in structure and feeling. Dreams are usually fragmented, while near-death accounts are orderly, lucid, and leave long-lasting transformative effects. A third is hormonal effects. Near death, the body releases large amounts of endorphins and anandamide, natural morphine-like substances that create bliss, making people feel light and merged. This may explain why many feel boundless love and absolute peace. Yet it still does not answer how they can recall precise external details while the brain is nearly inactive. Some scientists point to a global memory replay effect. As neurons are dying, the brain releases memories all at once, like a hard drive playing back its final data. Hence the panoramic life review. But even this is insufficient. If the brain is shutting down, where does the energy come from to project the entire memory stream with such clarity? One noteworthy finding comes from Sam Parnia's group. In the AWARE project, they placed images and symbols on high shelves in emergency rooms, visible only if one truly left the body. Some patients after revival accurately described those hidden images, while the EEG at the time had been completely flat. No one claims this proves a soul, but clearly awareness can operate in ways current science does not yet understand. From there, the research community split into two camps. One holds that near-death experiences are neurological illusions produced by a dying brain. The other holds that they are experiences of consciousness separating from the brain, suggesting that awareness is a substrate independent of matter. Some neutral scientists propose a model called non-local consciousness, meaning mind is not imprisoned in the brain. The brain is a receiver, while awareness is a signal that pervades the universe. Like a radio that does not create music but only picks up broadcasts. When the radio breaks, the music does not disappear. It simply stops playing there. Though not officially accepted, this model reminds many of the Buddha's words more than 2,000 years ago. Consciousness arises in dependence on name and form, and name and form persist in dependence on consciousness. Awareness is not in the body nor outside it. It is a seamless stream of dependent arising. From a strictly scientific standpoint, near-death experience has not yet been proven to be life after death. But it is clear that during periods when the brain has shut down, there is still a subtle form of knowing at work. It observes, records, and leaves very strong imprints. After recovery, experiencers often change completely, something that any biological hypothesis struggles to explain. No longer fearing death, they live more gently, grateful for each day, and feel a deeper purpose in life. This leads sincere scientists to humbly admit that perhaps we do not yet understand the true nature of consciousness. Perhaps what we call death is only the shutdown of a system, while the knowing mind continues on in another form. And from here, a new question arises. If the brain is silent and the heart has stopped, yet someone still sees, then who is the one who sees? If consciousness does not reside in the body, where does it dwell, and by what does it arise and cease? Science has no answer yet, but early Buddhism explains this clearly with the notions of consciousness conditioned by name and form, and karma leading to rebirth. In the next section, we will approach this view, not through belief, but through dependent origination, where the mind arises from, and after death what it relies on to continue. Science can measure brain activity, but still does not know what consciousness is. In the Buddhist teaching, however, mind and consciousness were discussed very early on, not as an immutable soul, but as an impermanent, dependently arisen flow of knowing. To understand this, we must return to one of the central concepts of early Buddhism, vaya, that is, consciousness. In the Sayukta Agama and the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha repeatedly affirms that consciousness is not me, not mine, not myself. Consciousness is not a soul because it has no fixed essence. It is merely the knowing response that arises when the sense bases, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, contact their objects, form, sound, smell, taste, touch, mental objects. With each contact, a moment of consciousness arises, knowing seeing, knowing hearing, knowing feeling, knowing thinking. When the object changes, that consciousness ceases. When new conditions arrive, a new consciousness arises. If we are separated from the senses and their objects, that consciousness also dissolves. Therefore, the Buddha says, dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. Dependent on the mind and mental objects, mind consciousness arises. Consciousness has no controller standing outside to observe. It is a conditioned response, arising and vanishing continuously. For this reason, the stream of consciousness is never the same twice, like a river that never holds the same water. When we say, I am seeing, in fact there is no I who sees. There is only a process of seeing occurring due to converging causes and conditions. In Majjhima Nikaya 38, the Greater Discourse on the Destruction of Craving, the Buddha explains the exquisitely subtle interdependence of consciousness and name and form. He teaches, conditioned by name and form, there is consciousness. Conditioned by consciousness, there is name and form. Name and form depend on consciousness, and consciousness depends on name and form, like two sheaves of reeds leaning on each other. Here, name means feeling, perception, formations, the psychological factors. Form means the physical side, the body, the sense faculties. These two exist by relying on each other. Consciousness needs name and form as its support, and name and form need consciousness to function. When name and form disintegrate, that is, when the body dies, if karmic conditions remain, consciousness immediately takes up a new name and form and arises there, like one flame passed to another torch. This explains why death is not annihilation. Death is only the breaking apart of an old configuration of name and form, while the formless stream of consciousness continues on, taking up a new embodiment according to karma. In the Abhidhamma, the Buddha describes mind as a continuous flow of moments. Each mind moment arises and then immediately ceases, like a flash of lightning that appears and disappears. But because the arising and ceasing are so swift, we imagine the mind to be continuous, like an oil lamp whose flame changes at every instant yet seems to shine without interruption. The commentators call this the continuum of mind, santati. Within that continuum, there is no self, only a succession of causes and effects. One mind moment ceases and the next arises, carrying the imprint of the previous, like a seed containing the sprout of a new plant. The Buddha once asked his disciples, "What do you think? Is the water of the Ganges today the same as the water of the Ganges yesterday?" They answered, "No, blessed one." The Buddha taught, in the same way, this body and mind change at every moment. There is nothing we can call as self from yesterday to today. Therefore, each mind moment is a tiny life, arising and ceasing, being reborn continuously. What we call death is only an interruption in that flow. after which a new moment, called the rebirth linking mind, arises immediately in a womb or in another realm, according to karma. There is no soul that travels. There is only the succession of conditions, like two flames passed one to another. The new flame is not the old, yet it is not separate from it. In the Buddha's view, consciousness has no independent essence. It is only the result of conditions. When a person repeatedly thinks, speaks, and acts in a certain way, that consciousness bears the imprint of that karma. When the body is left behind, the stream of consciousness seeks the realm that corresponds to those habits. For example, one who cultivates loving kindness and often practices generosity becomes familiar with the feeling of ease. At death, that stream inclines toward a light, bright realm. Conversely, one who nourishes anger and cruelty becomes familiar with fear and darkness, and that stream, heavy with those tendencies, falls to a lower realm. Karma is not fate. It is the accumulation of mental habits moment by moment. Death is not determined by a single final act, but by the entire set of mental tendencies cultivated throughout one's life. And the stream of consciousness, like an unmanned boat, will drift in the direction of those habits. The Buddha called attachment to consciousness one of the most subtle wrong views. Many practitioners see clearly the impermanence of the body, yet cling to the mind as a refined, indestructible soul. He teaches, if anyone says, "This consciousness is mine, I am this is myself," that person has not seen the dependent arising of consciousness. Consciousness only arises when there are conditions and ceases when conditions end. There is no person within it. When this very knowing turns back to illuminate itself and sees its own non-self nature, that is liberating wisdom. When the body is about to break apart, name and form no longer provide sufficient support for consciousness. The final mind, called the death proximate mind, arises, carrying the full energy of karma. When that mind ceases, the rebirth linking mind arises immediately in a new realm. There is no gap between the two minds, no soul in transit, only continuity of conditions. Just as when we light one candle from another, nothing flies across. Only light is transmitted. Therefore, death is not loss, but a transformation of the stream of consciousness. What we call I today is merely the composite of countless conditions within that stream. This body is form conditions. Feelings are feeling conditions. Perception is recognition conditions. Formations are habit conditions. Consciousness is knowing energy. When those conditions disperse, the structure called I dissolves. When conditions gather, a different I appears. Understanding consciousness is not only to know what happens after death, but to see clearly the process of living right now. In every minute and second, our mind arises and ceases without pause. If we observe carefully, we will see those births and deaths as distinctly as waves rising and subsiding. Exactly in seeing that arising and ceasing, mindfulness is established and wisdom opens. In meditation, the Buddha teaches, when the mind has greed, know the mind has greed. When the mind is without greed, know it is without greed. To know in this way is to see consciousness within consciousness, no longer identifying with it. One who trains deeply and sees clearly each fluctuation of consciousness realizes there is no someone who is thinking, only a stream of thoughts. There is no someone who is hurting, only a stream of feelings. There is no someone who is living or dying, only an endless dependent arising. In that seeing, the fear of death dissolves, for one knows that whatever arises will cease, but conditions do not vanish. Consciousness does not die. It simply changes its supporting conditions. The foolish take consciousness as self. The wise see its dependent arising, no non-self, and thus go beyond fear of birth and death. When this is understood, we no longer ask, where do we go after death? We simply ask, right now, where is my mind going? When the heart stops, the blood ceases to circulate, and the EEG shows a flat, silent line. People usually assume that life has ended. Yet those who have died and returned say that in that very moment they still knew they were dying, even saw their own body lying there. This makes both medicine and philosophy ask a question. In the instant between life and death, what is truly happening in the mind? Early Buddhism explains this phenomenon with the principle of name and form conditioned by consciousness. Consciousness relies on name and form to exist. When name and form has not fully dissolved, consciousness can still operate, though faintly and discontinuously. It is like a flame about to go out that still has a glowing ember, just enough to cast images of karma, perception, and memory. As the four elements of the body gradually disintegrate and the five sense faculties, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, lose their capacity, only the mind faculty remains, operating in the subtlest depth of the mind. This is the stage when consciousness fluctuates most intensely. Lacking support in the body, the mind begins to project its own private world. If you have ever had vivid dreams in which you clearly saw scenes, heard sounds, and felt contact, then that already proves the mind can generate a complete world without the body. In dreams we still see, without eyes, and hear, without ears. That is the function of the perception aggregate, the capacity to register and represent images, sounds, and sensations internally. The near-death state is similar to an extremely deep dream, but it differs in that the body is truly breaking down and the perception aggregate is operating with the full energy accumulated by karma. The images that appear are no longer willed. They are the natural expression of mental habits and the final impressions that remain. In the Abhidhamma, the Buddha calls this the death-proximate imagery. Images, memories, and realms generated by karma right before consciousness leaves the body. Some see scenes as beautiful as heavenly realms. Others see darkness, fear, snakes, blood, and fire. No one outside is projecting those scenes for us. The mind itself projects itself. In Buddhist thought, the mental stream has many layers, from coarse to subtle, from the active conscious processes to the life continuum mind, Bhavagasiddha, the deepest base that sustains life. When active mentality stops, only the life continuum vibrates. This is the in-between zone of waking and dreaming, life and death, where one can see, hear, and know without bodily sensation. A near-death experience is precisely the turbulent movement of the life continuum, one side leaning toward the present life, the other pulled by karma toward a new realm. The mind has not yet reached Siddha, the death consciousness, so awareness remains connected to the body but is no longer entirely within it. Thus, a person in this state can leave the body and still know, yet has not left life altogether. There is still a very strong thread, the conditional link between name and form, not yet severed. When that condition dissolves and Siddha ceases, consciousness seeks a new realm. When it has not dissolved, the person can be drawn back, resuscitated. This is why many in NDEs say, "Someone told me it wasn't my time, and then I returned." One of the most common phenomena is seeing a brilliant light. From a scientific angle, this light may be a biological response of the oxygen-starved brain. From a Buddhist angle, it is the joint activity of perception and wholesome mind. As the body nears dissolution, greed, hatred, and delusion temporarily subside. The mind becomes clear and light because there is nothing left to cling to. That is when the mind's intrinsic luminosity flashes forth. The Buddha taught in the Anguttara Nikaya that this mind is radiant, only stained by incoming defilements. The light seen by the near-death person may be the light of the purified mind self-revealing, a glimmer of the innate clarity. But because one lacks sufficient concentration and wisdom to recognize it, the perception aggregate immediately grasps it and fashions images of light, tunnels, deities, or welcoming relatives. All of this is interpretation by perception, not evidence of a soul existing independently. Another common description is seeing one's own body from the outside. Buddhism regards this as consciousness wavering between interior and exterior of the body. When the five senses suspend, the mind generates a reflective image of the body itself, like a person dreaming of seeing themselves asleep. In deep meditation, practitioners may sometimes see their meditating body from above. This is not a soul leaving the body, but the mind separating from bodily sensations. Because perception remains, the mind paints that image. Just as in a dream we see ourselves flying or walking while the body lies still in bed. A near-death experience is an extraordinarily powerful dream in which the perception aggregate projects an entire private world. If the person dies completely, the realm they saw becomes their actual rebirth. If karmic conditions are not sufficient, if something draws them back, such as a call of love or remaining merit, then the stream of consciousness returns to the body, life resumes, and they recount their passage through death. Thus, in the light of Buddhism, the NDE is not proof of a soul, but a subtle manifestation of consciousness as name and form are dissolving. The mind then is at once hazy and lucid, both dream and real, because the body's boundaries have vanished while the karmic causality of mind continues to operate. The near-death person sees without eyes and hears without ears. Everything unfolds in the inner space where perception, feeling, formations, and consciousness overlap. Understanding this, we see there is no rigid boundary between dream and death, only deeper degrees of the body-mind's dissolution. A practitioner of mindfulness can recognize these degrees even while living. This is precisely how the Buddha witnessed death within life. If what is called seeing the light, or seeing one's body, is a phenomenon of perception, then the true meaning of an NDE lies not in the scenes, but in the awakening that follows. Those who return from near death often say they value life more, love others more, and fear less. This aligns perfectly with the Buddhist teaching. Whoever sees the arising and ceasing of formations sees the Dharma. In near death, they truly saw the arising and ceasing of body and mind, even if only momentarily, and that awakened them. In short, the near-death state is the intersection of life and death, where the body is dissolving, the mind has not ended, perception is strong, and karma begins to operate. If one truly dies, those perceived scenes become the realm of rebirth. If life continues, it becomes a rare lesson in awakening. And like a dream, we do not need to die to know a dream is unreal. We only need to wake up. Likewise, we do not need to die to understand near death. We only need to live with mindfulness, and we will see life and death occurring in each breath. When the body is exhausted, the breath only gasps, and consciousness dims like a lamp about to go out. The mind enters a very particular stage that Buddhism calls death proximate karma. These are the images, feelings, and memories that emerge just before life ends. In that instant, the body has no power to function, yet the mental stream moves fiercely. Everything one has lived, thought, and done returns at once, as if an entire lifetime were gathered into a single final breath. The commentators of the path of purification explain that the realms appearing at death fall into three types, depending on each person's karma. First is kama, meaning the very actions one habitually performs reappear. A butcher may see scenes of slaughter and hear the desperate cries of animals. A practitioner may see themselves chanting, giving alms, or meditating. No one outside projects this back to them. It is the mind itself that opens the film of its familiar deeds. Second is kama nimitta, the sign of karma, the tools and symbols tied to one's usual actions. A teacher may see chalk and a blackboard. A tailor sees a needle. One who practices generosity sees an alms bowl. These images do not arise at random. Deep-rooted habits in the mind have turned into scenes. Finally, there is gati nimitta, the sign of the realm about to be born into. One with an unwholesome mind sees fire, darkness, and wailing. A gentle person sees light, lotuses, or hears soft, sweet sounds. This is the mind's last transition before moving to another life. The door opened between two worlds. The Buddha taught in the Anguttara Nikaya that the near-death mind leans one way, and one is born that way. The teaching is simple, yet contains the subtlest law of cause and effect. In the final moment, mind outweighs body, intention outweighs breath. Whether that leaning is wholesome or unwholesome, fearful or peaceful, determines the next realm. In other words, the near-death moment is not a mere ending. It is the mind's summation of an entire life. If we look back at the near-death research mentioned earlier, we see a deep correspondence. Many people report seeing their whole life again, each detail, each word, each emotion. They feel the pain of those they once hurt and the joy of those they once helped. In that radiant light, they are not judged by anyone. They themselves behold themselves. Is that not precisely the karma film replaying? The mind itself has recorded every deed as seeds, and at the near-death moment those seeds sprout all at once. Some say they see pure light, feel infinite compassion, and meet deceased loved ones. Others report darkness and terror, as if falling into an abyss. In Buddhist terms, these descriptions are death proximate karmic visions. The kind see brightness. The cruel see gloom. The trained practitioner feels ease. The wrongdoer feels dread. No one punishes and no one saves. The mind itself is unfolding a world that matches its own energy. The difference is that people who undergo near-death experiences in clinical settings have not truly died. They have only reached the boundary and have not crossed into the death consciousness, the Kuti-siddha. The stream of awareness is still linked to the body, leaving a chance for revival. When they are resuscitated, consciousness draws back. The body lives again, and they carry the memory of what they saw. For that reason, these experiences are drafts of death proximate karma, not actual rebirth. Had they gone on, those scenes would have become the new birth realm, and they would not return to tell the tale. A person can see their life like a film because nothing is lost in the mind. Every action and emotion leaves a trace in the mental storehouse, like engravings on a river's flow. As breath thins and the mind is no longer distracted by the body, those engravings emerge clearly. One who has lived kindly sees gentle, luminous images. One who has lived cruelly sees grim scenes. Therefore we say karma is the mirror of the mind. Looking into it, we behold ourselves entire. A subtler point is that in near death the perception aggregate is highly active. It can gather scattered memories into a single unified image so that a person seems to witness everything at once, something impossible in normal waking life. This explains why, in only a few minutes of dying, one can see an entire lifetime without being constrained by physical time. In that instant, time dissolves and only the provisional mind faces itself. When we compare these descriptions with the teachings, we find an almost exact correspondence. The modern medical near-death experience is, in essence, the threshold touch of the death proximate karma the Buddha taught over 2,000 years ago. Those who return to life do so because the mental stream has not been cut off from the body, so the karmic scenes have appeared only within perception. Those who truly pass away enter a new reality in which those scenes become the supports consciousness takes up. Therefore, Buddhism does not regard stories of passing through the light and coming back as proof of a soul. They are seen as models of an incomplete rebirth process. Understood this way, we stop arguing about whether there is another world and return to the essential point. What world is our mind creating right now? What we call the afterlife realm is simply the continuation of the present realm. One who lives in greed, hatred, and delusion is unlikely to see light at death. One who lives in loving kindness and mindfulness will naturally feel peace at the near-death moment. Death proximate karma is not an external judgment. It is the natural result of mental habits. The Buddha taught that mind is like a painter who creates myriad worlds. At the moment of dying, that painter renders the final canvas of this life, and that very canvas opens the next realm. Thus, one who understands the Dharma knows that practice is not only for peace in this life. It trains the mind and prepares it for the near-death moment. A collected, lucid, compassionate mind is the surest provision. Those who have touched the near-death threshold and returned often say they no longer fear death. They see clearly that what hurts us is not death, but not knowing how to live. In that moment, they realize that only love and clarity are real, while everything else, wealth, status, resentment, dissolves. Without knowing it, they have undergone a vivid lesson in the Dharma, a lesson about karma, mind, and the dependently arisen nature of life. If we listen deeply, we see that near death is not just someone else's story. It is a present mirror for ourselves. Every time we are angry, we taste hell. Every time we love, we touch heaven. Near death is only a magnification of those states at the last minute. Understanding this, we live differently, more lightly, choosing wholesome thoughts sooner and letting go earlier. In the end, what accompanies us is not the body or possessions, but only the orientation of mind, the stream of karma we cultivate moment by moment. Therefore, the wise do not wait for the near-death moment to adjust the mind. They train while they still breathe strongly. Each breath is a small near-death. Each arising of a thought is a birth and a death. Whoever lives with mindful awareness is preparing for the most beautiful kind of death, one without fear or delusion. a simple continuation of the luminous stream of knowing. From the Buddhist light, a near-death experience is not something mystical or miraculous. It is evidence of the power of karma and perception. It teaches that every moment of living is one more time we are creating the scenery for the final moment. When that moment arrives, we will no longer ask what death is, because we will have seen that death is simply the mind continuing to live in the way it has long been accustomed to live. When discussing death and rebirth, one of the oldest and deepest debates in Buddhist history concerns the intermediate body, that is, whether there is an in-between state between the death of the old body and rebirth in a new one. This is not only an academic question. It shapes how we understand the nature of consciousness, of karma, and of the rebirth process. A few centuries after the Buddha's Parinibbana, Buddhist schools took shape, including two major traditions, the Sarvastivada and the Theravada. Both draw on the Pali Canon but interpret differently the continuity between death and new life. The Sarvastivadins hold that between two lives there must be an intermediate phase called antrabhava, translated as the intermediate body. In their view, when a person dies, consciousness does not immediately take rebirth, but remains in a subtle state, like a breeze or a current of energy, wandering until it finds a suitable place to be reborn. This intermediate body can last for several days or weeks, depending on the weight of karma, before entering a mother's womb or arising in another realm. They rely on scriptural accounts of intermediate beings seeking rebirth, or reports of the newly dead appearing in recognizable form, to argue that consciousness can exist independently for a short time. Theravada, the early Buddhist tradition, maintains a very different stance. Its commentators argue that there is no intermediate body and that to posit a wandering entity is to misunderstand dependent origination. According to this view, the mental stream is never interrupted. The moment the death consciousness, kuti siddha, ceases, the rebirth linking consciousness, paisandhi siddha, of the next life arises immediately. There is no gap between these two mind moments. This is a subtle point in the Abhidhamma. The Buddha taught that within a single lifetime, mind arises and ceases moment by moment, too rapidly to count. When a person dies, that stream is not lost. It simply shifts from one set of conditions to another. By the force of karma, there is no soul traveling between lives. There is only the continuity of cause and effect. The commentators liken it to a flame passed from one torch to another. The new flame is not the old flame, yet it is lit by it. Nothing flies across, yet the energy is passed on continuously. Likewise, when someone dies, consciousness does not leave one body and enter another. There is only the linking of conditions from the final mind moment of this life to the first mind moment of the next. Another analogy is the light of an oil lamp. When the oil runs out, the lamp goes out. But if we add fresh oil and kindle it from that very flame, the light continues without interruption. Between the two lamps, no entity has crossed, only the conditions of energy and fire. The so-called self is the same. Nothing truly travels over. There is only a succession of conditions flowing on in karma and consciousness. From this, the early Buddhist tradition affirms that right after death, consciousness takes rebirth immediately, with no intermediate stage and no waiting soul. When the death consciousness ceases, the rebirth linking consciousness arises at once, like a seed sprouting the instant it falls into suitable soil. The causal stream continues unbroken. This is the principle of instantaneous rebirth. Placed alongside modern stories of near-death experience, this view offers a clear explanation. What people call leaving the body, wandering, seeing light, or seeing one's own body is not yet the process of rebirth. It is the phase in which the mind has not yet severed from the old sense basis. In other words, it is the near-death stream still relying on the old name and form, the conditions not yet fully cut. Because it has not passed through the death consciousness, the person can return. Once kuti siddha has ceased, the stream of consciousness arises immediately in a new body and there is no return. Therefore, those who undergo near-death experiences have not truly died. They reached the threshold of the death mind, touched the boundary, and were pulled back. The difference between Sarvastivada and Theravada reflects two ways of seeing continuity and discontinuity in consciousness. Sarvastivada treats consciousness as a stream that can exist independently and move through space like a subtle entity. Theravada treats consciousness as a process of pure dependent origination that never exists on its own, not even for a single moment. To assert an intermediate body is to imply that something can exist outside conditions, which contradicts the spirit of non-self taught by the Buddha. From the Theravada perspective, rebirth requires no waiting time. It is like two meshed gears. When one stops, the other turns. Or like an echo. The sound ends here and is heard there. Death and birth are not two separate points. They are two faces of a single, dependently arisen process. This is why the Buddha never said a soul goes to seek a new home. He only said that through conditions consciousness takes rebirth. With this understanding, near-death accounts do not contradict the Dharma. They simply stop before the moment of rebirth. When people say, "I saw the light and returned," that is a perception seen in the near-death phase. When the body is dissolving and consciousness still has support, it does not prove that a soul left the body and came back. It shows the power of perception and karma when body and mind interpenetrate at the end. Thus, when Buddhism says death is instantaneous rebirth, this does not deny the phenomena that science observes. It places them correctly within the psychological and karmic process. A near-death experience is a reflection of the near-death mind stream, not the independent existence of a soul. With this, we stop searching for proof of a soul and instead learn to look deeply into the causal stream flowing in the present. Each arising of a thought, each intention, each deed is part of the stream of consciousness that links living and dying. When the mind is gentle, that stream is light like flowing water. When the mind is defiled, that stream is heavy like lead. What we call a next life is simply the next stretch of that current. Therefore, the Buddha did not teach us to hunt for a soul. He taught us to contemplate the mind, so that with each breath we see the birth and death process at work. One who sees the arising and ceasing from moment to moment has seen nibbana, the going out of all turning. In that light, death is no longer the journey of a soul. It is the stopping of one set of conditions and the arising of another. Seeing this deeply, we find that there is no one who is born and no one who dies. There is only dependent origination operating without cease, like fire passed from one torch to another, shining through the long night of Sasra. When observing those who have undergone near-death experiences, what astonishes researchers is this. Although the structure of the phenomenon is similar, the content differs vastly from person to person. Some say they saw God and angels. Others say they met the Buddha and heard chanting. Others saw only a clear light or felt themselves dissolve into emptiness. Some entered a garden of lotuses. Others walked through snowy fields or stood on the bank of a luminous river. No two stories are exactly the same. This leads to a profound conclusion. The world we see in near-death is not a shared realm, but a reflection of one's own mind. The Buddha taught in the Sayutta Nikaya that due to differences in perception, beings see a world that differs. That brief statement opens a vast doorway into Buddhist epistemology. Sana, in Pali, often rendered perception, is not merely remembering or imagining. It is the way the mind identifies and recreates the world. Each person lives in a private, perceptual world, formed by memory, beliefs, experience, and karmic force. Thus, looking at the same scene, a virtuous person feels at ease while a vicious one feels ill at ease. Hearing the same sound, a pure mind hears Dharma, while a chaotic mind hears the clashing of swords. As the body is about to dissolve and the physical senses fall away, only the perception aggregate remains active. At that time, perception becomes the karmic, magic mirror. It gathers all images, memories, and beliefs to produce a corresponding realm. One devoted to the Christian faith, who has prayed a lifetime to the image of God, naturally projects that image at the near-death moment. A Buddhist accustomed to reciting the Buddha's name sees lotuses and light. One with no religion, who trusts only in pure wisdom light, sees themselves dissolving into clear, empty radiance. No external God, Buddha, or angel appears to welcome anyone. It is the mind itself appearing like a dream, reflecting what is familiar. Therefore, in the Abhidhamma, perception is listed among the 5 aggregates as the function of labeling and recognizing. When the body breaks down, perception continues to operate. assigning forms to sensations, and creating the world the person is seeing. Modern cognitive science arrives at a similar conclusion. Neuroscientists say the brain does not see the world as it is, but reconstructs it from memory and belief. When we look at a flower, the image is not in the eye. The eye only receives light. The brain redraws the flower based on prior experience. Hence, people see differently even when viewing the same scene. In near death, as the senses shut down and the brain receives no new input, it uses old memories to rebuild reality. If those memories are bound to religious imagery, the light takes the form of God or the Buddha. If they are bound to unconditional love, the light becomes love. If one carries much fear, the light becomes darkness. If steeped in craving, the light becomes the beloved's image. The world in that final moment is not an objective place, but a mirror of one's deepest interior. Neuroscience also shows that the cortical areas responsible for the sense of self often deactivate first during near death. When the eye temporarily switches off, people feel they merge into space and experience vast love or boundless light. This strikingly accords with the Buddha's teaching. When self-grasping dissolves, the mind reveals its luminous, selfless, limitless nature. Thus, belief and memory not only influence perception while living, they also shape the near-death realm. The perception aggregate is the painter. Karma is the palette. Belief is the brushstroke. Together they compose the final canvas of a life. A person full of hatred will see horrific scenes, because that mind can only create threat. One who lives in love will see light, because that is the only thing their mind knows. From the Buddhist perspective, this has a deep meaning. Each person lives in a world created by their own mind, not only after death, but right now, in every moment of life. When the mind is crowded with worry, the world around us is hell. When the mind opens, that world is heaven. The near-death realm is only a magnified version of what unfolds daily in our hearts. In reality, there is no universal near-death experience for all humanity. Each person sees a different world because each bears different karma and perception. Karma is the guiding force. Perception is the reflecting mirror. Consciousness is the flowing water that reflects every color. Thus, two people collapsing at the brink of life and death can inhabit entirely different inner landscapes. One falls into panic, another smiles in equanimity. This also explains why, in the same accident, one person feels extreme fear while another feels profound peace. The external scene is the same, but the inner world is not. The Buddha said, "Mind precedes phenomena. Mind is chief. Mind shapes them." When the mind is right, the world is right. When the mind is crooked, the world is crooked. In truth, what science and Buddhism are converging on is the same point. Consciousness does not passively mirror reality, it actively constructs it. The brain does not merely record, it reconfigures. The mind does not merely see, it paints the seeing. In near death, when all physical layers have dissolved, this process is laid bare. There is no external world, only the mind creating its own world. With this understanding, we look at NDE accounts differently. We do not ask who is right or wrong, whether the Buddha was truly seen or not. We ask what the person's mind was reflecting. One sees the Buddha precisely because the mind contains faith in the Buddha's light. One sees fire because the mind holds the karma of anger. One sees empty radiance because the mind is not bound to any image. Each realm is a mirror of the inner mind, nothing more and nothing less. When we realize that due to differing perceptions beings see differing worlds, we begin to understand why the Buddha did not debate the afterlife. He taught how to see clearly that the mind is creating the scene right now. To see the mind is to see the whole cosmos. If the ultimate world is mind-made, then practice is the training of the mind so that perception becomes purified and faith rightly directed. When perception is pure, karma is wholesome, and the mind is lucid, both the near-death realm and this very life become peaceful. And when the final moment arrives, one no longer cares about seeing the Buddha, God, or light, because one knows that every form is merely the mind's shadow. When the mind is at ease, whatever world appears is a pure land. When the mind is deluded, even heaven becomes hell. Thus, understanding the mechanics of belief and perception, we learn a precious lesson. To know what the post-death world will be like, look at how your mind operates while living. There is no pre-made world waiting out there. There is only the world we are painting with each thought, each breath, each deed in the present. In modern studies of near-death experience, researchers often describe a strange phenomenon. The near-death person feels detached from the body, loses all physical sensation, yet abides in a lucid awareness free of fear, even profoundly peaceful. They say the body seems dead, but consciousness persists in another mode, light, vast, and luminously unbounded. Hearing this, we can recognize a deep correspondence with what the Buddha and meditative adepts described more than 2,000 years ago. In Buddhism, there are two pathways to a leaving the body state. One is the involuntary near-death phase. The other is intentional meditative absorption. In a near-death experience, body and mind are separated by biological shock. The heart stops, blood no longer reaches the brain, and the sense faculties fall silent. The person does not willfully go out of body. Karma and the failing body force the separation. By contrast, in meditation, the practitioner intentionally leaves sensual desire, enters absorption by calming breath, thoughts, and feelings until the body is light and the mind is quiet, while awareness remains lucid. Near death is the result of an unforeseen event. Meditative absorption is the fruit of deliberate insight. One is being torn from the body by circumstance, the other is going beyond the body through wisdom. Yet both reveal a common truth. Awareness can persist without the physical body as its support. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha describes deep absorptions called jhana, in which the mind attains utter stillness through refined feeling. When a practitioner abides in absorption, the breath becomes so subtle it is almost gone. The body barely moves, pulse and heartbeat slow, yet the mind is extraordinarily bright. At the highest attainment, nirodha samapatti, cessation of perception and feeling, even perception and feeling temporarily stop. The body seems to be off, yet awareness remains established as an exceptionally subtle, lucid, and tranquil knowing. From the outside, one might think the meditator has died. No breath, no response, no obvious pulse. Internally, however, awareness is present in a state of pristine purity. The texts say that when the meditator emerges, the mind is feather-light and wisdom is keen, as if bathed in the cool stream of nirvana. This recalls the accounts of near-death experiencers who say, "The body felt dead, yet I have never felt so clear, so awake, so at peace." The similarity is not trivial. In both cases, awareness steps beyond physical limits and experiences a spaciousness that transcends the body. The crucial difference lies in cause and result. In near-death, the mind is pulled from the body by biological imbalance, an unwilled event, even the outworking of karma. In meditation, the mind gently withdraws from the body through concentration and insight, the result of mindful training. Near-death is being thrown out of the stream of life. Meditation is stepping out in full awareness. One is dying without understanding. The other is death without delusion. In nirodha samapatti, the meditator temporarily goes beyond all activity of perception and feeling. There is no discriminating cognition, no fluctuating emotion, yet a fundamental awareness remains as a steady, luminous ground. Scientists might call this a timeless awareness, where biological processes pause, but knowing does not vanish. It is like dying without dying, the body off while the mind shines. From a neuroscience angle, near-death patients may show flat EEGs, yet when revived they report rich, structured experiences. This raises the question, where is consciousness if it functions while the brain is inactive? That question is precisely what Buddhism explores through deep meditation. Awareness is neither inside nor outside the body. It arises in dependence on name and form. When name and form temporarily suspend, awareness is not lost. It returns to its own serene, quiescent nature. Thus, near death can be regarded as an involuntary version of a state that practitioners reach intentionally in meditation. The difference is that in meditation one has mindfulness to observe the entire process, whereas in near death one is swept along by it. A skilled meditator can pass through the sensation of body dissolution without fear, knowing it is only a stratum of mind. A near-death subject lacks such steadiness, so when the body dissolves, the mind panics and perception projects myriad realms. Here is an intriguing intersection between consciousness science and Buddhist contemplative science. Modern research witnesses consciousness seeming to separate from the body, but does not yet grasp the mechanism. Buddhism has long described this not as a mystery, but as a natural capacity of mind when no longer bound by the body. In deep absorption, the mind is no longer pulled by the six sense objects, nor swept up by memories, beliefs, or emotions. In near death, the body likewise cannot tug at the mind, but the untrained mind reacts through perception and karma. One is conscious liberation, the other is unconscious separation. Seen deeply, these two phenomena are not opposites, but points along a single continuum of loosening from the body. One end is the bliss of absorption, the other is the departure of death. Both open a door to see the nature of awareness. It is not the body, not matter, but a formless stream of knowing that arises dependently. The only difference is that the meditator returns with insight, while the near-death subject returns with memory. One sees the Dharma in life. The other sees a dream at the threshold. Contemporary science, in studying near death, is in fact touching the same doorway the Buddha opened, the non-material character of awareness. To understand it fully cannot be done by EEG alone, but by direct meditative experience, wherein a practitioner can die while knowing they are dying, cessation without annihilation. From there one sees clearly that the cycle of birth and death is just the arising and ceasing of mind, moment by moment. From this vantage, near death is no longer something to fear. What occurs then, light, calling voices, the feeling of dissolution, are precisely what adept meditators pass through during absorption. If in meditation we learn to release the body while remaining lucid, then in death we can pass through it with complete wakefulness. When science and contemplative practice meet here, we discover that two paths, one from the laboratory and one from the meditation hall, aim at the same question: what is consciousness? If it remains bright when the body sleeps in stillness, no wonder that those who have passed through near death seldom live as before. Something remarkable happens. They fear death less, crave less, and live with greater compassion and simplicity. Many who once pursued fame and wealth return to plain, essential values. They begin to cherish life, to love others more, to feel gratitude with each morning. Death, instead of a terrifying shadow, becomes a quiet teacher that shows how to live. These changes have drawn the interest of psychologists, who note profound transformations that no short-term therapy can induce. A person may carry trauma for a lifetime, yet within minutes of near-death their mind can change at the root. Why? Because in that moment they touch a state of non-self, where every attachment temporarily releases. When body and awareness separate and the entire notion of I, mine, for me dissolves, an uncanny freedom appears. There is no more fear of loss, because one realizes nothing truly belongs to oneself. From a Buddhist perspective, this is easy to understand. In the near-death phase, the processes of craving, clinging, and becoming temporarily pause. Craving is the thirst to hold on. Clinging is the act of grasping. Becoming is the drive to become. When the body ceases functioning and the sense faculties no longer make contact, the mind has nothing to latch onto. So craving, clinging, and becoming have no opportunity to operate. In that moment, a person falls into a state akin to meditation, quiet, without wanting, without holding. Though brief, it is enough to leave a deep imprint, like someone who has glimpsed light after years in darkness. Many report seeing life clearly as a temporary game, that fears once so heavy become light as smoke. Some say, I not only knew I would die, I actually felt there was nothing to fear in death. It is precisely this direct feeling, not reached through reasoning, that shatters fear, craving, and self-view at the root. This recalls the Buddha's words in the middle-length discourses. Whoever sees the arising and ceasing of formations sees the Dharma. Whoever sees the Dharma sees Nibbana. In that instant, the near-death person sees arising and ceasing in stark nakedness. The body dissolves, the breath stops, the notion, I am alive, vanishes. Even for a moment, they witness impermanence in the most vivid way. Therefore, when they return, they live differently, with less hatred, less fear, less rivalry. Seen deeply, nothing they experience is supernatural. It merely reflects the truth the Buddha taught. All things are impermanent, non-self, marked by suffering, and cannot be possessed. The difference is that they see this in dying, while a practitioner can see it in life by being mindful with every breath. The Buddha did not advise waiting until near death to realize impermanence. He taught practicing mindfulness of body, feeling, mind, and phenomena here and now, so that each breath, each step, each feeling becomes a lesson in arising and ceasing. In the Satipatthana teaching, he says to contemplate the body in the body, ardent, clearly knowing, and mindful, to remove longing and distress for the world. As practitioners cultivate mindfulness, they see clearly that this body is only a stream of breaths, that this feeling is only waves rising and falling, that this mind is only a current of change. Seeing in this way, fear of death dissolves because they realize they are dying and being reborn in every minute. One need not wait for near death to know impermanence. One need only see change clearly in the present. That is to live with death in serenity. Those who have passed through near death often say, "I realized life is a gift." Buddhism teaches the same, but by a more intentional path, seeing death in each breath in order to cherish life. When we know each inhalation could be the last, we live slower, deeper, kinder. When we see each glance could be the final one, we love more and anger less. The view of impermanence does not make us pessimistic. It makes us awake, grateful, and humane. In practice, this is called mindfulness of death, Marasati. It is remembering death not to be afraid, but to live deeply. The Buddha instructed the bhikkhus to contemplate death each day and hour, so that when it truly arrives, the mind does not tremble. One who practices well sees that death is not an ending, but a natural transition of conditions. Hence, the greatest lesson from those who died and returned is not what lies beyond, but how to live rightly on this side. They live differently because they have seen what we usually forget. Everything is fragile. Only love and wakefulness are real. And we do not need to wait for the heart to stop to realize this. We need only be still, look deeply, and breathe slowly. We can die a little each day, dying to greed, anger, and delusion, and live again through kindness and wisdom. Near death, therefore, is no longer a tragedy, but a great lesson in awakening. Those who have crossed that threshold do not become saints, but they come to understand that fearing death is fearing the loss of what was never truly ours. Seeing this clearly, one does not need to return in order to live differently. Even now, we can live differently, with a mind that does not grasp, that does not fear, that holds only mindfulness and gratitude. The Buddha said, "Whoever contemplates death daily does not live heedlessly. Death does not come to them like a thief in the night." The near-death person learned this through the shock of life and death. The meditator can learn it through the breath. Two different paths meet at one point. Living mindfully is the way to go beyond death.